A few years ago, I was having a conversation with somebody, and I was arguing that a lot of what is going on in culture has been pointing towards people disbelieving in science and disbelieving in what goes on within the scientific endeavor. And as we've seen, it is now November 2020, there has been this growing sort of cultural norm against the idea of higher education. So that is going to university, going to graduate school, becoming an academic. There has been a growing discontent with science in general, the sort of whole nature of science behind what is going on. And there has been sort of a disbelief in what education can do. And so I actually want to have this conversation right now with you. And I think that this is a really important sort of timely thing to talk about in terms of, why is the belief in science actually decreasing? And it seems like it's decreasing on a regular basis. Now, if you look at sort of metrics and things like that, I don't think you're going to see that, because this is more of a cultural thing that's going on in terms of, there might be some sort of early indicators and sort of metrics, and, maybe it's people not wanting to get vaccinated, things like that, that are sort of indications that there is some sort of disbelief that's going on at this moment. But there is a very real sense that a lot of people are disbelieving in the benefits of research, disbelieving in science in general and in higher education. And I think a lot of it actually is true, or not in the sense that it's true, but there is a lot of there's a lot to be sort of thinking about with these arguments. And what I'm going to do is try to explain this at this moment. So if you don't know me, I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, Professor Dave Maslach, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I wanted to pay the favor forward and help you out as much as I possibly can. So I'm not going to get into sort of how we can change this so much, but just get into, some things that I think that are going on in culture, in why this might be going on in terms of the disbelief or people believing that there is, science is failing us at this moment. And I think that there's many reasons. It's not one particular thing, but here are some things I think are really important. So the first thing is that scientific role models, I think, are very, in terms of, the popular culture role models. We think of, Albert Einstein, for example. And I love this guy. If Bill Nye actually watches this, I think he's a wonderful individual. So I think, Bill Nye is another one. Neil deGrasse Tyson, another wonderful individual. I love you guys. I'm not sort of knocking you in any sort of way, but I think the way that science is being framed at this moment is rather detached from how we understand the world and truly what is going on in the world around us. So, Einstein, we think of, people go into science, we think that they're going to be the next Einstein and, create some big, large theoretical model or something like that. Bill Nye has this wonderful thing, and it's very geared towards kids in terms of it's fun and exciting, and there's lots to do all the time. Neil deGrasse Tyson is very much like, really telling this wonderful stories in terms of what goes on in science, a sort of, theoretical understanding of what's going on. And I think, in my personal opinion, I think what is going on is that there seems to be a value of science above all important realities in our life. Right, so we might value, scientific efforts, for example, and I think it was Einstein has this really famous quote that there's no real room for families in science, or something along those lines. I might be misquoting, but there is sort of this value system where science and the theoretical idea is above everything else in terms of things like, family life. In things like love and culture, right? Like actually going and witnessing beautiful things that we see in this world. And I think that there is some real need for us to inject some of these sort of design elements, I guess you would say, in how we understand science and what we sort of make sense of science. Because those things are very important in our lives. We can't discount what those things mean to us. my family means more than my scientific efforts by far. And, that's what we might value, what we're actually doing. And if you actually look at how scientists are rewarded in their career systems and stuff, it very much is rewarded on placing value on individual ideas where they get citations. The more people that cite you, actually, it sort of shows how much of a scientist you are and how of a grand person you are in science, because lots of people cite you and everybody knows who you are. But in reality, in our real lives, how we actually do things, like me and you right now, it's far detached from that. I don't care if somebody cites who I am. I care about my family. I care about, that my wife does well, that she does well in her career. I care about my kids, that they do well in school. I care that we actually have a good time in this world, that, I care if my kids are sad and my family's sad and I'm sad. All of these things are so incredibly important, yet we discount those particular things. We think that those are only for, mental health professionals should be dealing with that kind of stuff. And that's not the case. Reality in this world is far from what we sort of imagine in the scientific endeavor that's sort of being displayed or talked about in, the scientific role models that we know. Real life is a lot different. And let me give you an example of this. And this sort of, tells a little bit about my story. I was, a good Catholic boy for a long time. I still believe I'm still a believer in all sort of, senses of the word. But, when I was in grade 11, I was an altar boy for many years. And I was invited to become a priest. They sent me a letter and they thought that I would be a really good candidate as a priest. But, when I'm 17 years old, I heavily decided against it, absolutely decided against it. It wasn't even sort of in my mind in terms of doing this thing. It might have been sort of a little, inkling I could do this, but it wasn't there, because there is, and I'm not knocking religion in any sort of way, organized religion or anything like that. I think that there's beautiful natures of it as well. But, it just wasn't going to be part of my reality, because I really wanted a family. I wanted to do things that were, considered maybe not Christian at the time or Catholic at the time, in terms of, exploring the world and doing all those kind of things. And I just wasn't ready in any sort of sense of the words. And I'm never going to be ready with that. And I think part of it is because of sort of marketing and the sort of nature behind it, that we have to do sacrifices in our life to do this particular career, because it's something that is, and I largely view, and I know lots of people are going to argue with me, I view it as a career choice, right? Of going into ministry is a career choice. So I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for saying that, but whatever. It is a career choice and what you want to do and what you're going to do. And the same sort of stuff in science has been sort of brought on from this sort of historical sense that science was actually developed and came out of, things like monasteries, for example, and thinking about, thinking about the idea above, everything else. And, there is real strong religious overtones in science and how we actually kind of live life and stuff. But I think reality, as we know, the real world and how we live life, it's messy. It's not as clear as we would like. And I think that there is a real push and there's a real strong reason to acknowledge that maybe we should sort of change some of these things and allow for families and allow for, allow much more for families, allow much more for, women, for example, to come in, be part of career scientists and, people from all different ethnicities. There's so much room for that kind of stuff because it reflects real life in compared to what we are, how we understand the world. So if you are somebody that never seen scientists and stuff like that, like me growing up. There was nobody in my life that was real, like a scientist, or nobody went to higher education at all. It just seems like such a weird world. It's so sort of delusional in a lot of ways in terms of being detached from reality to do those things. And yet once you get into it and you get exposed to it, the better you feel about it. And that's the second thing I wanted to point out, is that we rarely have connections with people that have scientific careers or doing things that are in the scientific efforts. There's some people that do that. That's why there's a lot of inheritance, I guess, in scientific careers, where you see other professors, they breed other professors, things like that. It's because they get exposed to it. It's like community policing, right? It works the same way. If you see police in cars and they're just patrolling around, it's going to seem scary that they are doing the things that they're doing. But if they are out and about and you see them and you see that they have regular lives, they have doubts, they like to go for coffee, they like to do sort of simple everyday things, it doesn't seem so scary anymore. That there's real people behind the scenes, just like in science, right? We got to let people know that there's real people doing real things with real doubts, with that they don't have the answers, that they don't seem like a big egghead in any sort of a way, that we are just kind of bumbling through life too. And I think that those are really important ways to think about the scientific endeavor, in that we should be connecting more with people and doing things that are a little bit more connecting. That's why it's really important. I think this sort of YouTube channel is very important, because people get to see that there's real people struggling with real things out there in the scientific world. A third thing that I think is really important is that we fail to teach people that science is incredibly entrepreneurial, in the sense that you create things, that you develop things, that discovery is not this linear process. And I think it's a failure, tremendous failure in terms of how we teach science in schools, that we teach it as more facts and is very fact-based, that there is this sort of, and we sort of accumulate all this sort of knowledge, and that is an important part of the scientific effort. But you have to also behave like innovators or entrepreneurs, or people that are sort of building things and really going in a different going in a different direction that other people do. And that component, that sort of entrepreneurial component, where there's high amounts of uncertainty. You don't know what the right answer is. Nobody's done this before. You're the first person to do this thing. That really is tough to deal with the first time that you deal with that. So going from transition from undergrad to graduate school, where you're just making crap up, in the sense, it's bounded, right? So somebody's going to misquote me, but you have to go and use that knowledge, 80% of the knowledge that you sort of accumulated, but then you go and you have to do things that are very exploratory, very different, unique, that nobody else has done. And there's so much uncertainty there. You don't know what to do. Just like in entrepreneurship, you don't know what to do either. And so this is the fourth thing that I think is so important, that we're failing to acknowledge that the scientific effort produces a lot of failure, that there is a lot of dead ends that happens, that you feel like a failure. Now, the cumulative effort of pursuing something and discovering that isn't the right way to go, that's very wonderful. That is very productive. But for the individual scientist, the individual person, the academic, the researcher that is actually doing that, and they discover that they can't do this thing, or it's a complete failure, it really, really eats at people. It's like in entrepreneurship. There is a great book it's called Born Losers in entrepreneurship. And it really is about the story. We sort of highlight these famous scientists, Einstein, Oppenheimer, all these really famous, beautiful scientists that are out there. I sound like, I sound like Donald Trump saying beautiful. But there is all these wonderful scientists that we have as role models, and we think of them as, that they created this wonderful thing. But what you don't see is that is only maybe 5-10% of the actual people that are doing things. And the ones that we really know, it's only 1 out of 100,000 people that, has done those things. Einstein is 1 out of, millions of scientists, probably hundreds of millions of scientists at this moment, that has the same sort of prestige as him, that sort of changed the world as him. There is so much to be said behind that, and everybody else feels like a failure behind that, right? Not everybody is going to get the MacArthur Award, the quote unquote genius grant and things like that, because there's so much indirect messiness in science that when you experience it, when you go through that, you are just like torn apart. Right? It's like entrepreneurs. We know of the famous Elon Musks and all those people, right? The Bill Gates and all those people that are sort of celebrity entrepreneurs at this moment. Well, what you don't see is that, there is a hot dog salesperson on virtually every major street in the United States and around the world. They're selling hot dogs and sausages. Those are entrepreneurs too, and they're doing their job. And some of them don't get by, or they're just scraping by. There's a huge sort of body of people that are doing things that are very similar, and they're doing on things that are entrepreneurial or scientific, and they don't get that far. And so people get very delusional in terms of what it means to be a scientist and what it means to actually do things in this world when you have a lot of failure. You think when you're 15 years old, you're going to start the next hot dog vendor, and you are going to become the next, Elon Musk, because you're going to build up this money, and then you're going to go and sell this hot dog stand and do something else, and then all those kind of things. But reality hits, and you realize that it's not as easy as you thought it was going to be. And the same thing in science. You think that you're going to be an Einstein. Everybody thinks that. And then you go and you realize that, man, this is hard. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do. And with a lack of mentorship that's out there, you kind of fall apart. And you don't know what to do at all. And I think the last thing that is incredibly important for why I think science is really failing us at this moment is that we recognize realized outcomes, and we reward realized outcomes. We reward in the scientific effort at this moment things like publications, citations, other sort of, other awards, things like that. But there is so much behind the scientific effort that's not public, that is not realized, that is not available, that's not visible to other people. And if we fail to genuinely acknowledge interest in the scientific effort, and we reward only things that are, explicit or realized, we're going to run into issues, because we're going to disincentivize people that genuinely have an interest in the scientific effort. And I realize that this is kind of uniquely, there's two components, uniquely sort of part of American culture. That's assigned, everything is sort of codified, and there's lots of competition and things like that in terms of we have to record and compete with other people. That's sort of uniquely American. And then, the other component is that we've been grappling with this for a long time in terms of, whether we should be kind of these scientists that walk around and just dream up things versus somebody that is very productive and publishing and all that kind of stuff. I realize that is a true sort of component in terms of what we're battling, but we haven't really gotten this balance right, I don't think, at this moment. And so if we reward only those people that are showing progress, that are showing outcomes, guess what? We're only going to reward those people that have the support system behind them that allow them to do that. Do I think my kids probably outperform other people because they are smart? Probably not. It's because, and I'm not bragging in any sort of way, they're my kids. I have gone through this process already, and I can tell them how to do some of these things, where somebody else that hasn't had this experience and doesn't have that infrastructure behind them, they don't get it. And it's a huge uphill battle for them. We're going to lose a lot of people doing that. So, with these components, I think we're really, really struggling in science in terms of getting these things right. I think there's ways that we can get around this in terms of marketing and being real human beings and showing what real science is all about. But, in the end, until we get this down, until we actually start building this story of what it actually really truly means to be a scientist, what it means to actually do work in a scientific career, what it means to be a researcher, we're just not going to get there. And we're going to always have these battles in terms of you should be more practical and you should be more theoretical, all these kind of things. But we have to get past that. And we have to tell people that there's real people, real individuals, real stories that are out there doing real things in science, and that they're not any different than you or me or anybody else. So with that, give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel. Take care. Bye.